Hello, welcome to this little video where I'll be discussing CMI Assignment 502, Principles of Developing, Managing and Leading Individuals and Teams to Achieve Success. This is the first of 11 videos. There'll be one for each assessment criteria. This will cover a brief introduction and I'll be jumping straight in to talk about assessment criteria 1.1. So this video is all about really getting up and running the assignment. So CMI Assignment 502 is made up of 4 tasks. Slightly confusingly, the last one is task 3, part A and part B, but that's 4 tasks. There's a total of 11 assessment criteria. Each task is made up of a certain number of assessment criteria. It's 11 in total, so hence the 11 videos, one for each assessment criteria. The total word count should be approximately 4,400 words max, but that doesn't include references and subheadings and all that sort of thing. If this is your first assignment or you're only doing the one, you'll need to begin with a brief statement of context, a paragraph on your role as a manager in the organization. If you have already done 501 or a different CMI assignment, you will already have done this, so you won't need to do it again. But if this is either your first assignment or the only one that you're doing as part of the award qualification, you'll just need to do a brief, it doesn't need to be War and Peace, just a little bit about you, your management responsibility, and that's grand. And then we can get into the assignment itself. So task 1, write a report entitled Approaches to Developing, Managing and Leading Teams. And our first assessment criteria, 1.1, evaluate the use of theoretical models for developing, managing and leading teams. And it says models, so I recommend 2. It also says the word evaluate. So we need to kind of think about what that means. Let's do that first. So evaluate, consider the strengths and weaknesses, arguments for and against, and or similarities and differences. The writer should then judge the evidence from different perspectives and make a valid conclusion or reasoned judgment. Apply current research or theories to support the evaluation when applicable. So obviously with this being a theoretical assessment criteria, we will have a little bit of theory in there for sure. So what we need to do with our theoretical models is look at their strengths and weaknesses and then draw a conclusion about their usefulness, the value that they bring. How do they help you? Essentially, how do they add value to your role, to the work that you do? So in summary, really with the theory bit, it's about choosing 2. Whichever 2 models you like or that you would like to discuss. I'm going to give you a couple of examples in just a moment. We need to look at their strengths and weaknesses and draw a conclusion about their value in helping you to develop, manage, and lead a team. How could you apply these to the role of a team in the role of a team leader? So here's an example, very well used and liked framework for leadership and management. There are slightly different formats of this that use slightly different language, but the overarching principles tend to be the same. Situational leadership. So it's that we've got balance defined between the amount of direction that we give, the x-axis, balanced against the amount of support that we give, y-axis on the left there. And the idea is that someone who's perhaps very new to a role might need a fair amount of direction, but after a few weeks, that would become micromanagement. So we need to move to more of a coaching style of leadership, which is a balance of direction and support. As time passes, perhaps they've been in the job for a few months, we can bring that direction right back in and moving to the supporting phase where the direction's less, but the support's still there. And then ultimately we get to the green box there, delegating, which is where they're developed and they're confident and they're good to go. So that's the situational leadership framework, a racing overview and a bit of an oversimplification there, but that gives you the taste of it. And if you have done a leadership development program to support this qualification, you probably already would have looked at this model in one context or another. So very brief description, and now we need to think about evaluation. So it's not just about describing it, we need to evaluate it. So let's have a look. What have we got? So in terms of its strengths, it's a simple logical model that supports leadership and development. So it kind of helps us to think a little bit about how to deliver tasks. So where we might need to be. So, for example, if you are in a critical incident or something like that, you might move to a more directing style. If but if you're working with a very experienced team of people and everybody knows what they're doing, you can be probably more supporting. So it kind of helps us to think about our leadership style. That's one thing, but it also supports development. So when we do our talent talent mapping, we can think about where people are on the grid and what we might need to do to move them through it. Ultimately, where we would want people to get to is that green box in the bottom left corner. So where are people now, and how do we need to engage with them to move them through the stages? So it supports leadership and development. So it's good for that. It's a good framework for mapping out where people are. So you again, talent and planning and that type of thing. It's first always a good discussion where you think they are, where they think they are, what they think they might need from you as a leader or manager. It's a systematic approach that supports consistency in the organization. So where this is often used is that in some organizations, everybody is trained how to use this model. So you get a kind of a common language and a consistent approach across the business. So there are benefits to that. So it kind of standardizes people's leadership approach. There are a few downsides. It places a lot of responsibility on the leader. So it's very leader focused. Whereas these days, actually, there is a question about um, whether it's a bit more equitable when colleagues, followers identify their own development plans and kind of take a little bit more responsibility for how they develop rather than it being purely the leader's responsibility. I don't know what you think about that. There's limited research on how actually effective it is an approach in practice. Does it really deliver results for the organization? There are little snippets of research which have been done on it, which are broadly positive, but not much. So, does it really work? Is the question. Does it oversimplify as well? But I think that's probably the key challenge to this one is that it all depends, doesn't it? In certain aspects of someone's job, they might be absolutely fine in that green box, very empowered and delegated, but then there's change or there's new things that they need to do that takes them over to the right hand side. So you could have somebody who actually, in theory, could be in all four boxes, just depending on what they're doing that day. So maybe to say that someone should be in one box is an oversimplification. I think that's probably the key challenge with this one. Modern work, modern roles, just more complex than that. The second tool is Tuckman's stages of team development. So when we bring a team together, what are we likely to see? Forming is when you first bring everyone together, and you're kind of in that initial team bonding stage. Storming is where there's a little bit of disagreement and argument. Sometimes there's a bit of jostling over hierarchy, the pecking order, who knows what, and who's the boss, and all of that sort of thing. Norming is when people sort of start to work that out and they start to focus on the task and that sense of making progress. And performing is where the team has kind of sorted itself out, it's balanced and a bit more stable, and it's actually delivering well against the mission, the objectives, whatever it needs to do for the organization. So forming, storming, norming, performing. Really simple, robust little framework for team building, for bringing together teams, and it's trained a lot in project management actually. So even still today, it's quite popular in things like agile and that type of thing. When you might be bringing together a team of people for a specific project, how do we kind of get people to that performing stage as quickly as possible? Is one of the project manager's challenges. So, in terms of the strengths of the model, it's evidence-based and has stood the test of time. So, yeah, Tuckman did base it on research, rather than just dreaming it up, which is something. Uh, it does help leaders to plan for team development in operational project environments. It is quite reliable. You probably have seen it yourself that when teams come together, actually these stages are quite realistic. It does happen that if there's a couple of strong characters in that team, sometimes they can knock heads at the early stage, and it can be quite difficult to get a team working together well where you have personality clashes, perhaps a variety of different skill sets, or which aren't always, or a variety of different personalities who aren't always easy to cajole and get lined up and working effectively together. Aligned to that, it might also help you to diagnose and work through any dysfunctional behavior in the team. It's always worth asking, particularly if you've got a new team or if a new person has just joined, has that changed the dynamics? And then where are we? So again, if you notice a bit of dysfunctionality, it could be not necessarily that there's anything fundamentally wrong, but we're going through the quite normal phases of team development. So it can help us to kind of diagnose and work out what might be happening in that sort of situation. Um, in terms of the weaknesses of the model, yeah, a little bit like situational leadership, it might oversimplify things. It suggests that we're all the same and that teams are all the same. It's just not the case. So some individuals might work through the process quicker than others. Actually, some teams, if you've got people who are quite used to working in a fairly volatile way and are used to kind of new teams forming around specific projects and that type of thing, you might find that it's quicker. That it doesn't you don't necessarily not all four stages might actually apply. It's possible that, again, if you've got a very experienced group of people who again are used to working in an agile way or whatever, you might actually miss that storming phase out. It's certainly possible in certain contexts. It possibly a bit oversimplifying to say that all teams behave this way. It's a 1965 model, so it was very much of its time, and things probably have changed and evolved a bit in the complexity of our thinking. It can go both ways. So again, it's not one directional, and again, that's something that the tool itself doesn't necessarily kind of explain. Is that you could find yourself in that norming or performing state, and you think, great, you're winning, and then a new change happens or something goes wrong, and the team could very quickly go back to a storming phase. Alternatively, it might be that you've kind of built a good team, but then someone goes, new person comes in, or there's a bit of kind of disruption from kind of personnel sort of um, perspective, and again that could throw you right back. So it's not necessarily a one-way journey, and the dynamics of the team can definitely move in both directions depending on what happens. The second objection, I think, is also really perhaps worth thinking about here, is it doesn't actually tell you how to manage the team through the four stages. So I think it is useful to kind of know that it happens, but it doesn't actually say, so how do we get to that norming and performing phase as quickly as possible? That's thinking which has evolved later. So things like contracting with the team, and if you like, those sorts of team coaching sessions at the start to get everybody aligned to, clear in terms of understanding the mission and how we work together well to achieve it. It's thinking that has come along a bit after this framework. So it does have of itself its limitations, and so um, it might need to be linked with other frameworks and management tools in order to actually get to the how, things like team contracting and that type of thing, which evolves it a bit further. Um, so the pros and cons to the to whatever two models you choose. Those are just two examples that I've just shared. But you would need to choose two, talk about their strengths and weaknesses, the pros and cons, and then come to a conclusion, which should be how you might use them in your leadership practice. So based on your evaluation, looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the tool, what can you take from it? How might you apply it? Your conclusion might be as kind of, it's a so what. We've looked at the strengths and the weaknesses. So what does that actually mean in practice? Then we are done. As I said, two models, so do it twice because it just says theoretical models. And then we're done. And that brings us to the end of assessment criteria 1.1. So my next video will be looking at the next assessment criteria. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for listening in.